I'll be getting back onto the electronic project shortly, but before I do that, I just thought I would include one more additional video and show a bit of interesting older machinery. And anyone that's got any substantial area of lawn will know that you very quickly accumulate a collection of mowers. And I'm no different. I've ended up with quite a few different mowers. And the paddock we're standing in, I use a kind of ride-on Kubota mower, but the lawn areas I prefer cylinder mowers. And the reason I prefer cylinder as opposed to rotary is because the roller tends to keep them flat, makes it easier to mow, and you end up with less cuttings. The whole thing's a lot easier, or at least in my opinion. And I have been using a Ransom's Mastiff mower, but it's a single cylinder 600cc petrol engine mower, and it's getting a bit expensive to run, so I've been looking out for a diesel mower. And being a bit tight with my money, I didn't want to spend too much money. Now that approach can sometimes bite you, and this might be an example of that. I'm not quite sure yet. This is a Dennis Premier mower, 36 inch, but it's got a diesel engine, which is what I was really looking for. Now, as you can see, I've taken quite a few of the covers off, and there are some problems with this mower. And it was sold as ready to go, but that's just an example of dishonest selling on eBay, which is a minefield at the moment. And I've already carried out quite a few repairs on this. Fundamentally, it didn't seem that bad. It seems to run okay. But the problem is this mower weighs about 400 kilos, and so it's a very heavy piece of equipment. And if we look at the back, you'll notice it's got two brake levers, so it's got differential braking, so you can brake the left and right hand parts of the roller independently, or at least you should be able to. But this, when I try to use it, is very difficult to turn. You can get it to turn round, but you've got to really kind of wrench it round, and it makes it pretty much unusable as it is at the moment. And when I looked at it, the reason for this is the differential's not working. If you look in the centre of the main rear roller, you'll see it's got this cap, screw cap, and most of mowers like this have a similar screw cap, and I know a lot of people seem to think it's so you can fill the roller with water. In fact, the guy that delivered the Ransom's mower said that that's what it's for. Now, I didn't say anything to him at the time, but that's most certainly not what that's for. It's actually the oil fill for the differential. If you fill that with water, you will ruin your mower. So it's possible somebody's done that in this case, and what's happened here is this entire roller's locked up. It rotates alright, but all three sections are locked together, and they shouldn't be. The way these normally work, I haven't seen inside this particular unit, but the way these normally work is you have power coming in on the end. So that's what this chain is doing. It's driving this shaft. This shaft runs all the way through that main roller. There's a bearing on the other end. There's a brake on each end of this. There's a brake on each of these outer sections, so you can brake them independently. But that shaft only drives the centre section of the roller. So it's got keys on the shaft, and it drives this centre section. On the periphery of this somewhere, there should be a pinion shaft that runs across it, and on each end of that does the pinion gear. So that just, when this is going in a straight line, that just does an orbit, and the gears on the end of it mesh with larger gears on each of the two outer rollers, and it just pushes them around. Those gears don't normally rotate when you're going in a straight line. It just pushes the two outer sections around. But when you want to corner, what should happen is these rollers should be able to turn independently relative to each other and relative to the centre section, but they won't. This whole thing is just turning as one solid piece, so it makes it very difficult to turn. And if you engage either of the two differential brakes, the entire machine slows down. I've tried freeing it up, but it seems to be absolutely stuck, so I think one of two things has happened, one of three things. One, there's been a major failure in there and it's all completely locked up. Two, somebody's filled it with water and the whole thing's rusted up. or 3. Somebody wanted to make it go in a straight line, so they've taken it apart and welded the whole thing together, which I hope is not the case. Either way, it's got to come out, so that's the project for today. I want to get this main roller out, we'll get it onto the bench, get it apart, and see what's going on inside. Okay, half an hour later, I've got the roller out. This thing weighs an absolute ton, so I need to get it into the workshop and see if I can get it apart and figure out what's wrong with it. So it's about an hour later and this thing's really putting up a fight. There's a locking collar on each end of the shaft, which was extremely difficult to get off. There's a grub screw in there, and that took some getting out. Did come out eventually on both ends, and this roller should spin freely on this shaft, but as you can see I'm having to use a puller to pull it all the way off. So there's a bush at each end, all manner of dirt and debris in there, I'm not sure what that is. The gears themselves look quite good, and there has clearly been oil in there, so it does not look like anyone's filled it with water, but it's just very tight. I think I'm not sure if it's corrosion, because I don't think the bushes are metallic, but it will not turn on that shaft, and as I say, I'm having to use a puller and put quite considerable force all the way off, and the other end's the same, so this could take some time to get off, and then I've got to try and figure out why it's so tight on there, but making progress, and hopefully we can get this working. So that's one roller removed, and I've slid the central roller off the shaft. I cleaned up the shaft first to make sure this wouldn't stick, and that came off fairly easily. I've got no idea why the outer rollers won't spin freely. There was some kind of build up on the shaft, so it might just be that the bushes are breaking down. There's a bush at either end of the two outer rollers, and I'm not sure it's made of some kind of high density fibre by the look of it, but it looks like it's failed and it's breaking up, and that seems to be what's bound up. Good news is that the gears in the differential all seem free and undamaged, so they haven't been welded up, which was my main concern. It does look like they've just bound up on the shaft and stopped turning. So next thing is to get the shaft out of the second roller. As I said, this should spin freely in these bushes, but it just will not move. So I'll get this onto the hydraulic press. I had to use a puller on the other one because the entire roller assembly won't fit into the press, but just this end roller will go in the press, so that should be a bit easier to get this side out, assuming it will move, and then I can start cleaning up and figuring out what to do about the bushes. So an hour and a half later, and I finally got the end rollers off the shaft, and as you can see here, there's an awful lot of rust and pickup on the end of the shaft. You can see where the bush was sitting, and that explains why it wouldn't rotate, and also why it was extremely difficult to get off. I ended up having to use the hydraulic press, and it took about 6 tons to push this shaft out of the second roller. So really tight. Got the first one off with a puller, but this one just wouldn't move, so I had to get it onto the press. It's now off. As you can see, it's sitting in the lathe. So what I'm going to do now is clean up this shaft. It's not, as far as I can tell, much of the material of the shaft itself that's damaged. It looks like it's just pickup from the bush that seems to be disintegrating. So I need to try and find some new bushes by the look of it, but I want to see how well this shaft cleans up first. So I'll get this spinning and give it a clean and see how it looks once we're done. So 10 minutes with some emery paper, and as you can see, it's come up reasonably well. A little bit of pitting, but nothing too serious. What I'll do now is spin it round and do the other end, which is about the same. It's got some pitting and some pickup from the bushes, and hopefully the shaft itself will be okay. So I'll get the other end done, and we can start looking at what to do with the bushes. It's the next day, and I've been making steady progress on this. Yesterday I got as far as machining the bearing surface, or the seal surface I should say, on the roller. Let's get a torch. And this surface here, I don't know how well you can see this, was badly chewed up, and I haven't done this one yet. This is next in line. So this surface, you can see it's very rough. There's a groove in it. That's where the seals run. And because this whole thing had been locked up, it was all turning as one piece, all three pieces were locked together. There's not a great deal of wear on these seals. They look quite good, so I don't need to change those. You can see I have cleaned up inside the differential housing. And as I say, I'll put this in the lathe and machine this, and so this is now nice and smooth. I need to do the same thing on this one, so that's the next job. And the rest of the drive rollers are in quite good condition. On the other side, we've got the opening for the brake assembly, so that's its inside for the differential braking. So that will be these complete. I think somebody filled these with concrete at some point, because while I've been working on them, all manner of bits of concrete and stones and things have been falling out, and a lot of it is way too big to be able to get in. So there's no opening big enough to get some of these stones in there. So I think these were intentionally filled with concrete that's been breaking up. So that's this section of them. We'll come back to these in a few minutes because there is still a problem. The centre section is in good condition, so the shaft slides in and out of there quite freely. If you're not familiar with how these work, then the sprocket that fits on this shaft is equivalent to the crown wheel on a car differential, so it turns this shaft all the time. And the shaft itself is keyed, so normally a key, or there's two keys, there's another slot like this further down, and this is normally keyed to the centre of this centre drive roller, so anytime this shaft turns, it rotates this assembly, and this is equivalent to the gear carrier in a normal car differential. You then have a shaft. There's another gear down here. I don't know how well you can see this, but there's a gear down here. Ignore this one for now, I'll come back to that in a minute. There's a gear here that's pinned onto a shaft, and on the other end of that shaft there is another gear. So we've got a gear on this end as well, and those two gears are pinned to the same shaft, so when one turns, the other turns. And the way this whole arrangement works is there's a gear bolted onto each of the two drive rollers, the outer drive rollers. I've taken this one off, as you can see. That would normally be on here. This engages with the gear, and when you're going in a straight line, these gears don't actually rotate. What happens is this entire drum is rotating, and this gear is kind of doing an orbit, and it pushes this gear with it, so it just pushes this round. It's not rotating relative to this, it's just pushing this round on whichever tooth happens to be engaged. And it's doing the same on both ends, so at both ends it's pushing the outer drive rollers round. But when you want to corner, they can turn relative to each other, so if you imagine turning this drum relative to this centre drum, then this would obviously rotate. And because it's on a shaft, it will rotate the shaft, but of course they need to rotate in opposite directions to allow you to corner. So on this end there are two gears that mesh with each other. They're the same gear. This is the same gear that's on the other end, but it's fitted on this end in the opposite direction to give you clearance on the outside. It then meshes with this other wider gear, and the large gear on the drum meshes with the outer half of this gear, and so you get a single one-to-one gear ratio, but it reverses the direction of the rotation, and then on the other end there is just a single gear, so it's just the one gear, and it's the same gear as the other end, but it's fitted on in the opposite direction, so that brings the teeth to the outside. That meshes with the gear on the drum on the roller at this end, but because there's no second gear, this rotates, or this roller rotates in the opposite direction relative to the roller on the other end. So it gives you the ability to turn corners and drive the rollers on each end in opposite directions. So it works in a very similar way to a car differential. So that works fine. I had fear that somebody had welded this up to make the machine go in a straight line. If they had a large football pitch, for example, they might want to do that. Not something I do, but I have seen it done. This was absolutely full of kind of sludge. I assume that no one's ever put oil in this. There was no oil in it at all as such. It was just thick black sludge. So I've cleaned all that out. This now slides freely in the centre section, so that's fine. But that's how it should slide in the drums. These should spin freely on the outer portions of this shaft, but they don't. Now the manufacturer, I called the manufacturer, I assumed that these bushes were at fault. So I called the manufacturer to see how much a new set of bushes would be. I need 4 bushes, 2 in each roller of course, and they want over £200 for a set. So I thought that was a bit steep. But they also said they were cast iron. Now these are cast iron. So you can see this magnetic torch sticks to them, but these are most certainly not cast iron, they're plastic. And I have double checked, so I was a bit confused, but I hadn't looked that carefully, but I have since double checked and they're definitely plastic. I think what's happened here, and the shaft won't go in, it took 6 tons of force to press the second roller off the shaft using the hydraulic press. And it won't go back in. Now, despite cleaning the shaft and the bush, it just will not go back in there. And I could press it back in, of course, but that would kind of defeat the point. It still wouldn't rotate freely. I think what's happened here is, I think there's rust and corrosion between the bush and the roller itself. And I think that's caused the plastic of the bush to be kind of compressed inwards. I've measured it, it's only about 0.2 millimeters, but it's enough, because it's quite a long bush, it's about 100 mil long, and that's enough to kind of grip onto the shaft and stop it rotating. I could of course replace the bushes, they're just easily pressed out, but I don't want to spend £200 on what's a fairly old mower anyway, unless I really need to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try reaming out, it's a very hard plastic, I'm going to try reaming these out to the correct size and see how that works. They've obviously been in there for a very long time, so I don't know how long they lasted. I'm assuming the fact that the new ones are cast iron means this was a common problem. So I don't know if it'll last any length of time. Maybe now it's been compressed it will last a lot longer. But I'm going to ream these out, get it working, and if I start getting problems again, I'll get a new set of bushes. In fact, what I'll probably do is buy a piece of phosphor bronze, machine my own. I think that would be better than cast iron running on a steel shaft anyway. Be about £100 in material and about half a day's machining, but that's still only half the price of a new set from the manufacturer. So that's where I am with this. Next step is to get these reamed down. The next step is to machine this seal surface on this one, get this into the lathe, get this machined, and then I can get them into the mill and get them reamed out. And then I can reassemble all this, and the final thing is the bearings. There's a bearing assembly sits on each end of this shaft, and the bearings are completely shot. They make horrible grinding noises, so I've got a pair of those in order, and I'll replace the bearings. I've already pressed out the old ones from the 2 hubs. So that's where I am, getting fairly close now to being able to reassemble this, and hopefully we'll then get the ability to steer the machine. Okay, well it's only a mower, but as ever I like to clean things as I go along. I've got it apart, so I might as well. So I've cleaned out the hubs, so this is where the bearings sit in. One of them will barely turn. Makes a horrendous noise. The other one's not too bad, but swapping the bearings, so I might as well do both. I'm sure it is due for changing. It feels a bit rough. It does spin quite freely, but as I say, I've got it apart, so I might as well change those. Cleaning up the brake shoes. This is the before and after. Not sure why these are so rusty. The amount of rust in this is quite alarming. I don't know if it's been sitting in a puddle or something, but there's a lot of rust inside the main rear roller, so that could explain why the bushes have been forced onto the shaft. But it is all cleaning up quite nicely. and once the new bearings arrive and I've reamed out the bushes, I can start to reassemble. So I've got this set up for reaming, and the problem I've got is that this shaft should be a nice smooth sliding fit in here, but it'll go in so far then it just jams up. I can't get it any further in, but you can see that the outside portion is actually quite loose. So one of several things has happened here. Either, as I said before, there is rust formed. This tunnel goes all the way through, and it's possible that rust has formed on the outside of the bush, between the bush and the roller, and it's caused the bushing to be kind of compressed inwards. One other thing that could have happened, I've seen it once before, is because there's so much weight on this shaft. There's best part of 1/3 of a ton on this shaft bearing down on these rollers. And what can happen on the plastic bushing is it can kind of roll it out as it rotates. It kind of rolls it out a bit like when you roll out pastry, and it lengthens the circumference of the bush, and then the bush kind of starts to contract because there isn't space for it anymore, and it ends up being tight. Or it could be a combination, but either way, as you can see, this doesn't go through. Now this one I've just finished reaming, so this is how it should fit. So it goes all the way through and it rotates nice and freely. So this is an oiled shaft, it's quite slippery, but there is absolutely no play in this, but it rotates nice and freely. So as you can see, it's a very nice sliding fit, which is how it should be. So I'll do the other roller and make sure it all moves smoothly and there's nothing binding, and then I can start to reassemble. Incidentally, if you're wondering what I'm using to ream, it's an adjustable reamer. So this particular one goes from about 29mm to around 34mm. These are quite useful. Don't use them all that often, but when you get something like this, they're extremely useful because you can adjust them to very fine tolerances. So you can adjust these normally to probably about 1/20th of a millimetre or better. And they're not particularly expensive. I think this one costs about £30, but they are invaluable for jobs like this. So I'll get this finished and then we're ready to start the reassembly. I've reassembled the roller. I've got the two end rollers fitted onto the shaft. I've refitted and locked the collars into place, and the whole thing now should work. If you're not familiar with the way differentials work, the whole point of them is the center section is the driven section. That's the only part that's directly coupled to the drive shaft, so that will turn when the drive shaft turns. The two outer rollers are driven through the differential gears, and so they're really just pushed round when it's going in a straight line. And we can tell if it's working. If I rotate one of these rollers, the other roller should rotate in the opposite direction. So if I try and turn this one, you'll see that the other one turns the opposite way. And the idea of this is that if you imagine you're going in a straight line, all three rollers turn together. If you lock one of the rollers by putting on the brake, there's a brake on each of the two end rollers, this roller will slow down or stop. The center roller will of course keep turning because it's the one that's being driven, but the outer roller might sound a bit counterintuitive. The outer roller will turn at twice the speed of the center roller, assuming that this roller is actually stationary, and so it causes the machine to rotate around the stationary roller. And of course, if you stop the other roller, the reverse will happen. So that's now assembled, and what I have to do now is reassemble, refit the brakes, and then this entire assembly can be refitted to the machine, and we can see if we actually have the ability now to steer it properly. I've refitted the roller to the machine, refitted the chains, made a few adjustments. I've still got quite a few repairs to carry out yet, but I just want to see if it's actually usable. As it was, it couldn't be used. It was way too hard to steer. This thing weighs best part of 400 kilograms, so when the roller's locked up, it's pretty much impossible to turn. You can see there's grass cuttings. I was testing it, but just couldn't really use it. So we'll get it started up and see if it's any better. So I've got the camera in one hand and trying to operate a machine of this weight with one hand will be a bit of a challenge. It was impossible before, would have been impossible, so we'll see if we've improved things. So I'll get it started up. So it is diesel, so it'll be quite noisy. Hopefully you can hear me, it's quite windy today. And we'll see if it will go. Okay, so it goes in a straight line, we'll try and turn it. Okay, well I'm going to call that a win. Turns very easily, I can do it one-handed. It was a major struggle turning it before, but now just a gentle squeeze on one of the brakes and it turns without any issues at all. So as I say, I'm going to call it a win. I won't be doing too many videos like this, but if you want to see more mechanical repairs, then please leave a comment. I also have jobs like this that I need to be working on, so there's plenty of this sort of thing if you're interested.